At 6:42 on a Friday evening, Naomi Brooks discovered that someone had sold the one night at Magnolia table that had never been available for sale. 84 place settings waited beneath amber lights. White magnolias filled the centerpieces, and a string quartet had begun tuning near the front windows while black sedans gathered outside. Her assistant, Emily, stood in the office doorway, holding a tablet with both hands, as though the device itself had become dangerous. The private event had been approved through Naomi's account. The deposit had cleared, and the client had paid enough to cover several months of the restaurant's community meals. Naomi read the date twice, then looked at the host's name and felt an older injury rise beneath the practical emergency. Ethan Whitmore was bringing business leaders, investors, and reporters to celebrate Vivian Carlisle, the executive whose companies had tried repeatedly to purchase Magnolia Table. The reservation was scheduled for November 7th, the anniversary of Samuel Brooks's death, and the night Naomi had promised her father would always belong to people who could not afford a seat. Emily explained that the new booking system showed Naomi's authorization code, although Naomi had blocked the date permanently when the software was installed. The catering team had already prepared the expensive menu requested by Vivian's office, while the families invited to the annual dinner had been told earlier that week to arrive through the courtyard entrance. Canceling the corporate event could lead to a lawsuit, public embarrassment, and a financial loss Magnolia Table was not strong enough to absorb easily. Honoring it would mean sending away neighbors who had trusted Naomi for years, including retired workers, single parents, veterans, and former employees of her father's diner. Naomi looked through the office glass toward the oldest table in the dining room, a scratched oak table Samuel had built from two discarded doors when they could not afford furniture. She understood that the restaurant might survive one broken promise financially, yet she was not certain it would remain the same place afterward. "Refund everything," she told Emily, keeping her voice steady. "Move the community dinner inside and tell the arriving guests there has been an unauthorized booking." Within 10 minutes, the cancellation reached Ethan's assistant while he was crossing Midtown in a black sedan. Ethan had agreed to the dinner because Vivian was stepping down after 12 years as his most trusted executive, and because she had insisted Magnolia Table represented the future of the neighborhood investment plan she intended to announce. He had not asked why the restaurant mattered to her, although he knew Naomi had rejected 6 purchase offers connected to companies Vivian controlled. When the message appeared, he first assumed an employee had made a mistake, then saw Naomi's name attached to the refusal and stopped listening to the financial briefing beside him. He had watched her career from a distance for 20 years, reading profiles about her cooking, her neighborhood work, and the restaurant that had become nearly impossible to book. He had never contacted her directly because he told himself she deserved peace, though some nights he recognized that explanation as a more respectable name for fear. Vivian sat across from him and remarked that Naomi had chosen a dramatic way to create publicity. Ethan asked whether she had known the significance of the date. Vivian's answer came a fraction too late. It was the only evening their system offered. Ethan left the car 2 blocks from Magnolia Table and walked through cold November rain toward a crowd that had already gathered outside. Several reporters stood beneath umbrellas, attracted by the canceled event, while volunteers carried soup, bread, and folding chairs through the courtyard gate. Naomi moved among the guests in a plain black chef's jacket, greeting an elderly couple and helping a woman settle 2 tired children near a heater. She saw Ethan approaching, but her expression did not change, and that calm unsettled him more than anger would have. He stopped near the entrance and told her he had not known what the evening meant. Naomi replied that ignorance explained his presence, not the approval created through her private account. Ethan asked for 10 minutes to understand what had happened, yet Naomi handed a tray to a volunteer and told him the people waiting for dinner had already lost enough time to decisions made by strangers. He remained because leaving would have looked too much like the decision that had defined both their lives. Emily placed him beside the service table where he carried bowls and poured coffee while neighbors spoke about Samuel, without recognizing the young man who had once spent every Friday in his diner. Near the end of the meal, a delivery worker approached Naomi with an envelope found inside the unlocked rear vestibule. No one had signed for it, and the security camera covering the door had stopped recording for exactly 4 minutes. Naomi opened the envelope beneath the courtyard lights and found a photocopy of an old loan agreement carrying Samuel's signature, Ethan's initials, and the name Ashford Capital. Across the first page, someone had written a single sentence in dark ink. "Ask Ethan what he bought with your father's debt." Ethan recognized the agreement before Naomi turned the second page, because he had signed it at 26 while believing desperation could be controlled if he kept enough information to himself. The loan belonged to Charles Ashford, the investor who had financed Ethan's first development company after every major bank rejected him. During the same month, Ashford quietly purchased the overdue mortgage on Samuel's diner, then offered Ethan a partnership broad enough to save the business and dangerous enough to own his future. Naomi saw Ethan's initials beside clauses allowing Ashford to take control of the diner's property if the development company failed or Ethan violated the partnership. She asked whether he had used her father's home and livelihood as security for his ambition. Ethan answered that he had agreed to the loan to stop an immediate foreclosure, but he knew the explanation would sound like another powerful man asking to be judged by intentions rather than consequences. Naomi folded the document and placed it inside her apron. "You can explain after the last guest leaves," she said. Tonight still belongs to them. The final family departed shortly after midnight, leaving melted candles, damp coats, and the quiet disorder of a room that had been used for something honest. Naomi led Ethan into the kitchen rather than her office, because polished rooms made difficult conversations too easy to perform. She placed the agreement on a steel counter and asked him to begin with the part that made him look worst. Ethan stared at the old signatures and admitted that Samuel's diner had been weeks from foreclosure after medical bills and unpaid taxes overwhelmed the family. Samuel had suffered a heart attack, Naomi was attending culinary school during the day and working nights, and Ethan's company was close to failing before its first building opened. Ashford offered enough money to protect both businesses, but he demanded control of Ethan's company and secrecy about the diner's debt. Ethan signed because he believed he could repay the loan before Naomi discovered the danger. Instead, Ashford changed the development plan, added the diner's block to a demolition proposal, and warned Ethan that resistance would end the medical payments keeping Samuel in treatment. Naomi remembered those months differently. Through hospital hallways, unanswered calls, and Ethan's growing absence whenever she needed him most. He had told her he was traveling for work, then failed to meet her at the abandoned storefront where they planned to open their first restaurant. 3 days later, she received the brass key they had shared, and a note saying she deserved someone who could offer more than promises. Ethan now admitted that Ashford had offered to release the diner if Ethan surrendered his ownership stake, left the company for 2 years, and disappeared from Naomi's life without revealing the agreement. Ashford argued that Naomi would follow Ethan into uncertainty if she knew the truth, while Samuel's health could not survive another financial collapse. Ethan accepted those terms, partly to protect the diner, and partly because he was ashamed that the future he had promised her depended on a man he despised. "I told myself you would heal faster if you hated me," he said. "The truth is, I could not stand there and let you decide whether I was worth the trouble." Naomi's anger did not disappear when the missing facts fell into place. It became more exact. Ethan had not chosen ambition over her in the simple way she believed, yet he had still taken away her right to understand the danger, support her father, or decide what kind of life she was willing to share. She told him that protection without consent often felt identical to betrayal from the other side. Ethan agreed without defending himself, which frustrated her, because part of her had prepared for the arrogant man newspapers described. She asked why he had never returned when the 2 years ended. Ethan said he had returned to find the diner closed, Samuel dead, and every message sent through mutual friends unanswered. Naomi reminded him that none of those messages contained the truth, only requests to meet. He admitted that he had still been trying to control the conversation by deciding when she should hear what happened. Emily entered the kitchen holding security footage recovered from a backup camera facing the office corridor. The image showed a person using Naomi's access card 3 nights earlier, then entering the booking system while another figure waited near the rear stairwell. The first person's face remained hidden beneath a hood, but a silver medical bracelet flashed at the wrist when the person reached for the door. Naomi recognized it as the bracelet worn by Marcus, her operations manager, whose wife had recently begun treatment for an aggressive cancer. Before she could process the betrayal, Ethan examined the loan copy again and noticed an archive number stamped at the bottom. The mark belonged to Carlyle Strategic Holdings, the company Vivian had built before joining him. Someone had not merely discovered the past, someone had acquired it, studied it, and chosen this particular night to place it between them. Marcus arrived before sunrise, carrying Naomi's access card, a resignation letter, and a face that made denial unnecessary. He had worked at Magnolia Table for 9 years, first as a server, then as the manager Naomi trusted with payroll, schedules, vendor disputes, and nearly every problem she could not solve from the kitchen. 3 months earlier, a consultant representing Carlyle Strategic approached him after his wife's insurance company denied coverage for an experimental treatment. The consultant offered to pay the medical costs if Marcus provided temporary access to the reservation system and copied several files related to the building's mortgage. Marcus had been told the private booking would create pressure during acquisition negotiations, though he insisted nobody mention the community dinner or the loan agreement. He believed Naomi would cancel the corporate event, generate unfavorable publicity, then accept a generous purchase offer to protect the staff. His reasoning was weak, but his fear was real, and Naomi found that combination harder to confront than simple greed. She removed him from management immediately, required him to surrender every message and payment record, and told him his family's health insurance would remain active until investigators determined the next steps. Marcus began crying when Naomi said compassion would not prevent consequences, but consequences would not require her to abandon his wife. Emily watched from the doorway, uncertain whether Naomi's decision revealed extraordinary strength or a dangerous inability to protect herself. Naomi understood the concern, yet she refused to let Vivian purchase Marcus's desperation and then force Magnolia Table to become cruel in response. Ethan's security team traced the consultant to a small advisory firm that had also contacted 3 of the restaurant's suppliers. By noon, a farm canceled its weekly produce delivery, a seafood company suspended service, and 2 corporate clients withdrew holiday bookings using nearly identical language about reputational concerns. The timing proved the pressure campaign had begun before the canceled dinner and was designed to look like a normal commercial reaction afterward. Vivian had built a trap that depended on Naomi behaving exactly as expected. Ethan confronted Vivian in his office while Rain moved across the Hudson behind her. She did not deny authorizing an acquisition strategy, though she claimed she had never instructed anyone to misuse Naomi's account or exploit Marcus's wife. Her goal, she explained, was to purchase Magnolia Table and combine its community programs with a larger redevelopment project that included housing, retail, and a branded charitable foundation. Naomi's refusal had delayed permits, encouraged other property owners to resist, and threatened a deal employing hundreds of people. Ethan asked why she chose November 7th and why Ashford's loan file had appeared at the restaurant. Vivian answered that history often revealed what public reputations concealed, then accused him of becoming morally offended only because Naomi was involved. The criticism reached him because it was partly true. During years of expansion, Ethan had rewarded executives for clearing obstacles quickly and had rarely examined how pressure traveled from a boardroom into an ordinary person's life. Naomi spent the afternoon replacing canceled suppliers with neighborhood businesses too small to offer the same prices or quantities. A bakery agreed to double production. Several former culinary students located produce from family farms, and Ruth organized retired neighbors to help prepare vegetables for the weekend service. The work offered a brief relief from secrets and corporate strategy, reminding Naomi that Magnolia Table had survived difficult years before national magazines learned its name. While peeling carrots beside Ruth, Naomi admitted that she no longer knew whether refusing Ethan had protected her father's promise or helped Vivian create the crisis. Ruth told her that a decision could be right and still carry consequences, which was not the same as causing the harm that followed. The simple distinction steadied Naomi more than every public message praising her courage. She had spent much of her life believing strong people should absorb pain quietly, perhaps because silence was the only inheritance Samuel and Ethan had both left her. That evening, Naomi searched the basement storage room for the diner's original mortgage records. Behind a crate of old menus, she found Samuel's wooden recipe box, tied with a faded blue ribbon, the brass key resting beneath cards written in his uneven hand. A sealed letter addressed to Naomi lay below it, marked to be opened only if Ashford's debt ever returned. Samuel admitted that he had accepted Ethan's arrangement because illness had made him terrified of leaving Naomi with nothing, even though he knew secrecy would eventually wound her. He wrote that Ethan had protected the diner for a time, then disappeared when Ashford demanded it. But Samuel refused to call that choice noble because fear had shaped it as much as love. Attached to the letter was a receipt for a safe deposit box containing the final release agreement for the property. Bank records showed that the box had been opened 6 weeks earlier by an attorney representing Carlyle Strategic Holdings, and whatever Samuel had protected inside was now in Vivian's possession. The bank would not identify the removed documents without a court order, although its records confirmed that Vivian's attorney had entered the box under authority inherited from Ashford Capital. Samuel's letter described a signed agreement releasing the diner and any future business Naomi created on the property from Ashford's development claims. Without the original, the company that recently purchased Magnolia Table's mortgage could argue that old obligations remained attached to the land, creating enough uncertainty to frighten lenders and force Naomi toward a sale. The legal details were less important than the pattern. Vivian had acquired the loan history, located Samuel's private records, pressured Marcus, secured the reservation, and arranged for the past to surface publicly. Ethan's attorneys advised him to treat the matter as corporate misconduct and avoid personal involvement, because every statement connecting him to Naomi could weaken both investigations. Naomi's attorney gave similar advice, yet neither of them wanted another decade shaped by people speaking through representatives. They met at Samuel's old table after closing, with Emily and independent counsel present, and reduced the crisis to 3 questions. They needed to protect the restaurant's mortgage, prove the supplier pressure was coordinated, and recover the release agreement before Vivian could destroy or alter it. Ethan offered to purchase the mortgage and transfer it to Naomi at cost. She refused immediately, not because the plan lacked usefulness, but because replacing Vivian's leverage with Ethan's money would preserve the same imbalance under Kender management. Emily proposed a community ownership fund, allowing employees, neighborhood residents, and customers to purchase small shares while a charitable trust protected the annual dinner. Naomi resisted the idea because Magnolia Table had been the one part of her life nobody else could take from her. Then she heard herself and understood that fear was speaking in the language of devotion. If the restaurant truly belonged to the community it served, allowing that community to help protect it was not surrender. Ethan's compliance director uncovered an interview recorded during the purchase of Ashford Capital's archives 5 years earlier. In the recording, Vivian acknowledged Samuel's release agreement and warned that routine disclosure could weaken negotiations involving several properties. The interview proved that she knew the document existed, although it did not reveal where she had placed it. Ethan confronted Vivian again, this time without anger, and asked what Magnolia Table represented to her beyond a valuable corner. Vivian told him her parents had owned a grocery store 3 blocks from Samuel's diner until Ashford purchased their debt and forced them out. Her mother never recovered financially, while Ethan's first restoration project received awards for revitalizing the same neighborhood. Vivian joined his company because she wanted enough power to prevent anyone from treating her family as disposable again. Over time, however, she came to believe that ownership was the only safety anyone respected, and that independent businesses surviving through goodwill merely offered comforting exceptions to a system built on pressure. Her history explained the wound, but did not excuse the people she had chosen to harm. Vivian insisted Magnolia Table's public image allowed developers like Ethan to claim neighborhood renewal could remain humane, while dozens of less famous owners disappeared without attention. She intended to purchase the restaurant, preserve its name, expand its charity work, and use Naomi's approval to secure the larger project. When Naomi refused, Vivian decided to prove that principles without capital could be broken. Ethan asked where Samuel's agreement was kept. Vivian replied that releasing it would expose lenders, officials, and executives whose cooperation protected projects employing thousands of workers. Ethan recognized the familiar argument because Charles had once used Samuel's health and his employees' futures to make dishonesty sound responsible. He told Vivian that innocent workers deserved protection, but they could not remain permanent shields for executive decisions. Ethan proposed placing every disputed project under an independent monitor so payroll and construction could continue while records were released. His board warned that surrendering control would likely cost him the company, damage credit, and invite criminal investigations. Naomi did not ask him to make the sacrifice, because she no longer wanted her life shaped by choices men made in her name. She told him only that whatever he decided should be something he could explain without calling fear a duty. Ethan authorized the monitor and ordered the compliance interview released with supporting files. Hours later, Vivian's attorney contacted investigators and offered to produce Samuel's original agreement, along with evidence about the supplier pressure, if Ethan publicly acknowledged his role in creating the culture she had used. His legal team urged him to reject the demand, yet Ethan knew that blaming Vivian alone would preserve the system that had taught her results mattered more than the methods used to obtain them. Ethan spoke the next morning from a plain conference room rather than the company's media auditorium, refusing banners, prepared applause, or the polished language his communications team had written. He stated that he had not ordered the campaign against Magnolia Table, but he had built a company where executives were rewarded for removing obstacles, while communities were rarely given power to challenge decisions. He described the independent monitor, released the relevant acquisition files, and announced that he would step down after an interim chief executive was selected. Reporters asked whether Naomi had changed him, expecting a simple story about a billionaire redeemed by an old love. Ethan replied that Naomi had exposed a failure he should have recognized without needing a personal connection, and turning her into the reason for his conscience would place another burden on her. When asked whether leaving the company was an admission of guilt, he said it was an admission that responsibility could exist, even when direct orders did not. The company lost billions in market value that afternoon, yet lenders agreed to maintain payroll because an outside monitor now controlled the disputed projects. Vivian delivered Samuel's agreement the following day from a private archive leased through one of her holding companies. The original signatures, notary seal, and property description invalidated the claim threatening Magnolia Table's mortgage. She also provided messages showing that her consultant had approached Marcus and suppliers, though she denied authorizing threats related to his wife's treatment. Prosecutors continued investigating, and Vivian's cooperation reduced uncertainty without erasing her choices. Naomi declined every interview asking whether Vivian deserved forgiveness, because forgiveness was not a public verdict and sympathy did not remove accountability. Marcus accepted a plea agreement for unauthorized system access, returned the money he had received, and agreed to community service after his wife's treatment ended. Naomi kept his health coverage active through that date, then stepped away from his legal decisions because compassion did not require managing the consequences for him. The community ownership campaign grew faster than anyone expected, though most contributions were modest. Servers invested part of their tips, neighborhood families purchased small shares, former customers mailed checks with handwritten notes, and local suppliers accepted longer contracts in exchange for stable pricing. Naomi sold a minority stake and transferred the building's mortgage into a cooperative protected from outside acquisition. She remained head chef and managing director, but major financial decisions now required approval from an elected board. The arrangement frightened her more than she admitted, because she had spent years building Magnolia Table into the one place where nobody else could suddenly disappear with the future. During the first board meeting, members rejected her plan for an expensive kitchen expansion and requested a smaller proposal. Naomi went home angry, then laughed at herself the next morning, when she realized disagreement had not destroyed the restaurant. Shared ownership meant other people were allowed to care differently. Ethan did not attend the cooperative's opening celebration or release a statement taking credit for supporting it. He spent the following months meeting investigators, answering community boards, and transferring disputed developments into new agreements granting residents voting authority. His name came down from several buildings after neighborhood groups chose local historical names instead. The loss bothered him at first, which he admitted privately because pretending otherwise would have turned humility into performance. He began advising a smaller employee-owned development firm, accepting that influence felt different when people could vote against him. Naomi heard about the work through others but did not mistake changed behavior for a debt she owed him. They met again during winter at the recreation center, where Samuel had begun serving weekly meals 30 years earlier. Then Ethan carried folding tables, while Naomi arranged jars of flowers along the serving line, and for 2 hours, they spoke only about ordinary matters. After the guests left, Ethan apologized without explaining his motives, saying he had abandoned Naomi and then expected the pain to become understandable once she learned why. Naomi admitted that anger had kept her from questioning the story she told about him, because believing he had never loved her was easier than grieving a love damaged by fear and pride. She did not forgive him in a dramatic moment, nor did he ask her to. Before leaving, Ethan returned the old notebook containing their sketches for the restaurant they once planned. Naomi accepted it and told him that giving back the past did not guarantee him a place in her future. Ethan nodded, then said he would rather wait honestly than be welcomed for the wrong reasons. 1 year after the canceled Reservation, November 7th returned beneath a pale sky and steady rain. Magnolia Table closed to paying customers, while volunteers arranged the community dinner beneath the same amber lights that had once waited for Vivian's corporate guests. The restaurant now belonged partly to its employees and neighbors, and the annual meal was protected in the cooperative charter rather than depending only on Naomi's will. Marcus coordinated deliveries as part of his final month of community service, working under Emily's supervision and accepting the discomfort of returning to a place where trust had not fully recovered. His wife's treatment had helped, although nobody used her recovery to soften what he had done. Vivian awaited sentencing after assisting investigators in recovering several properties, and her name rarely appeared in conversation because Naomi refused to let the restaurant become a monument to the person who tried to break it. Ethan arrived without warning and joined the volunteer line, where Ruth assigned him to wash stockpots in the basement. He accepted the work without checking whether Naomi noticed, though she did when he carried the final load upstairs with wet sleeves and soap on his jacket. During dinner, an elderly guest recognized him from television and asked whether he still owned half of Manhattan. Ethan replied that he had learned ownership was often less permanent than people imagined, then listened while the man described losing his apartment during a redevelopment 20 years earlier. Naomi watched Ethan resist the urge to explain, defend, or offer immediate help. He wrote down the man's address only after being asked, then promised nothing beyond reviewing the records. The restraint mattered because Ethan had once believed love and money gave him permission to solve other people's lives before they understood the problem themselves. After the final guests departed, the cooperative board gathered around Samuel's original oak table to discuss the coming year. Naomi proposed converting the empty storefront next door into a training kitchen for adults returning to work after caregiving, layoffs, or incarceration. Several members worried the project would require too much debt, while others believed Magnolia Table had become cautious after surviving the crisis. Naomi listened, revised the proposal, and accepted a 6-month pilot funded through paid corporate cooking classes. The compromise would have felt like failure to the woman she had been a year earlier. Now it felt like evidence that a promise could survive other people touching it. Ethan waited near the front window while the meeting ended, reading the notebook Naomi had brought from her office. She returned with 2 cups of coffee and placed the brass key beside the faded sketch of 12 tables and a magnolia tree. For several minutes they spoke about Samuel, the diner, and the strange confidence of 2 young people who believed good intentions could protect them from every difficult choice. Ethan admitted that he had considered leaving New York after stepping down, because distance remained the first solution he imagined whenever staying required shame. He stayed because the communities affected by his decisions deserved more than an apology delivered before departure. Naomi told him she had considered refusing to see him again because anger had become familiar, and familiarity could resemble safety. She changed her mind when she realized avoiding him gave the past more authority than an ordinary conversation ever could. Ethan asked whether she believed they could become friends. Naomi smiled and said friendship sounded like an ambitious word for 2 people who had only recently learned to finish difficult conversations. He laughed, then asked for dinner instead, without a private room, a special menu, or any promise about what the evening would mean. Naomi opened the reservation calendar and found a Tuesday in March, nearly 4 months away. She entered his first name and phone number while warning him that Magnolia Table treated billionaires and retired school teachers with equal respect, which meant neither group escaped the waiting list. Ethan accepted the confirmation with more pleasure than he wanted to show. When March arrived, he came alone and waited near the entrance until Emily called his name. Naomi seated him at a small table beside the kitchen, where he could hear pans striking burners and servers laughing between orders. She joined him after closing with 2 bowls of Samuel's vegetable soup and no prepared speech. They talked about books, Ruth's opinions about table placement, the training kitchen, and the mistakes they could now discuss without turning them into weapons. Neither tried to restore the future they had imagined when they were young, because too much truth stood between those people and who they had become. Outside, magnolia petals gathered along the wet sidewalk while the restaurant settled into silence around them. Ethan asked whether Naomi still believed some promises lasted forever. She looked toward the brass key displayed near the entrance, surrounded by the names of employees and neighbors who now owned the place together. "I think promises change when people finally understand what they cost," she said. Ethan considered the answer, then nodded without trying to improve it. They remained at the table after the coffee cooled, not because regret had disappeared, but because neither of them needed to hide from it anymore.